The island is a globe of fire. The sea, boiling on every side, fumes like a cauldron. Be strong in faith, for now are we upon the confines of hell. This report in the 8th century was made by Ireland's St. Brendan. He sailed close to a volcanic island, flaming from the sea near Iceland, as Surtsey did here in recent years. These instant islands are minor repetitions of how much of Iceland itself burst up from the Atlantic seabed in the last upheavals that shaped the world as it is today. A billion years and several thousand convulsions later, the lunar landscape is eroded in corrugations of barren color unique on Earth. Nature has packed variety as well as violence into this island, almost the size of England or of New York State. Placed along a hidden crack in the outer crust of the world, just under the Arctic Circle, are live volcanoes, fields of steam and sulfur, and Europe's greatest glaciers, feeding the highest falls of water this side of Niagara. For centuries, the black basalt cliffs were the kingdom of the kittiwakes and the gannets, the puffins and the razorbills. The only intruders were occasional Irish monks that came as hermits to meditate and to die alone. Then, out of the east, the Viking longships. Ingolfur Arnarsson, fleeing from Norway in the year 874, to set down the first family in this new land. During the century of settlement that followed, relays of Vikings found sanctuary here from the tyranny of their Norwegian kings. Many came from still older colonies in Ireland and Scotland and brought along Celtic bondsmen and their families. Those that reached the haven of a protective headland looked for a gentle shore on which to beach their precious drachmas. And as seamen, they followed the shape of an upturned boat to build driftwood homes that would ride the harsh winds under the snug blankets of green turf that still anchor them to the soil. In less than 100 years, the few fertile tracts of the island were settled. The communities were committed to a pattern of living that changed little until the start of this century. For generations, survival depended on a delicate balance between safe anchorage for small inshore fishing boats and subsistence farming in the short summer season. The sailor farmers settled along estuaries where flat, well-watered meadows could provide grazing, grain, and a crop of hay essential to winter the livestock that have been brought across the North Sea in open boats. Today, there are still small holdings by the sea that continue as part-time family affairs, but much progress has been made in the mechanization of agriculture. Dairy farming and sheep raising in particular have provided surpluses for export markets. The ponies especially thrived in Iceland. The entire island depended on them for transport and communication. As their tracks linked up the villages and the population increased, the settlers formed a Commonwealth of Iceland to provide law, order, and justice. Hundreds of families trekked in to camp by the lake of Thingvellir, where in the year 930 they formed the world's first republic north of the Alps. From a curving backdrop of rock, the words of their elected lawmakers echoed directly to them. Here, too, began the storytelling that through sagas and eddas developed into one of the purest strains of literature in Europe. The Alting still meets in Reykjavík, now an elected parliament preoccupied with the complex problems of legislating for a modern economy. Since the Republic of Iceland was re-established in 1944, the nation has been active in international affairs. One of the first governments to join the United Nations, an early member of the Council of Europe, OECD, and the Nordic Council, Iceland is aware that her mid-ocean position is strategic as well as isolated. This Atlantic island sits squarely across the air, sea, and submarine routes between Europe and North America. Not convinced that neutrality could be a sufficient guarantee of independence, Iceland joined the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in 1949. Her representatives sit permanently on the Atlantic Council, with the same voting powers as fellow members from Europe and North America. Iceland has no armed forces, but by agreement with the United States government, she permitted the installation of a NATO base at Keflavik. This allows the system of mutual security covering most of Western Europe to reach back in depth toward the USA and Canada. This roof of the world has been of special concern to Icelanders ever since their early navigators discovered Greenland and North America 1,000 years ago. Below, Iceland's newest territory, the volcanic island of Surtsey. Overflying are Delta fighters patrolling the same Atlantic routes that Iceland's civil aviation has turned to good account as a profitable source of national revenue. In hours, these jet navigators fly routes their forefathers took a lifetime to discover. Each year, they carry to and fro across the Atlantic more passengers than there are people in their country. Staging in Iceland, they give tourists a first view of Reykjavík, the nation's capital. The older metal rooftops of Reykjavík are colored in the same apple green, battleship gray, and red lead paints used on the deep-sea trawlers by which the nation lives. But most of the modern city has been built in the past 20 years. $100,000 people, half the population of the country, lives here in the 10-mile coastal strip around the capital. Children are everywhere, and it is no surprise to discover that 1 out of every 4 Icelanders is presently in university or college or at school. In this uncrowded country, getting away from it all is no problem. A few minutes' drive from the high-rise apartment blocks is one of Europe's best salmon rivers. Inside city limits, a keen fisherman can have an afternoon sport on a run where up to 1,000 salmon are taken in a 3-month season. Iceland could produce many times more hydroelectricity than it can possibly use. To sell this surplus in mid-ocean, a vast new Burfell plant will generate energy to smelt aluminium ore brought to Iceland by ship. The refined metal will be re-exported at a planned rate of 60,000 tons a year. Still unexploited are countless hot springs and boreholes, some of them letting loose 1,000 tons of steam an hour. But this resource does provide an artificial climate permanently maintained under almost 30 acres of hothouses. Here, Icelandic gardeners and bird fanciers compensate a little for living further from the tropics than almost anyone else in Europe. Generations of small boys have enjoyed this ancient hot spring. In the 13th century, the great Icelandic writer, Snorri Sturluson, used the pool daily. There are now more than 100 naturally heated pools in the country where the water remains close to body temperature, even in midwinter. Year-round swimming lessons are compulsory for children, and proficiency in the pool is essential for high school graduation. Teachers only cancel classes when the outside temperatures get really cold by Icelandic standards, officially below 14 degrees, or around -10 centigrade. Less hardy visitors and tourists from abroad simply drift down to the lower floors of their hotel and do their swimming on the premises. In most of Iceland, hot water or central heating comes free and out of the ground. The most fashionable new way to use up steam is in the sauna. Air hostesses relax here after their transatlantic flights. Yet another hidden factor in good living so far north is the presence around Iceland of the warmer waters of the Gulf Stream. They provide one of the world's richest sources of fresh and varied sea fish to be added to the native river salmon and trout. This old wood-hulled fish restaurant in Reykjavík specializes in such typical Icelandic food. Plenty of the young people who go there, and especially students, do their holiday stint in the fishing industry. The boys sometimes go to sea, but most youngsters work through the summer on the fish wharves to process the catch. But the busiest fishing communities are isolated and reached conveniently only by air. Here, a special charter flight is taking the entire National Symphony Orchestra for the day to the offshore Westman Islands. Dressed ready for their afternoon concert and carrying their instruments, the musicians will be back home in the capital for dinner the same evening. For Icelanders, take planes the way most other people board a bus. 3 regular domestic airlines crisscross the country, and 2 more operate international jet routes to and from America and the rest of Europe. What trucks and lorries do in other countries, dozens of sturdy little air freighters do in Iceland. This airstrip is inaccessible many days a year. But But when the weather holds up, the air pony, as Icelanders call it, runs a shuttle service. To a really remote farming community, fertilizer is precious enough to travel airborne. So is the family radio set back from repairs, or a cot for the new baby. Around-the-clock airlifts in the season of the midnight sun are the only way to take out everything a village has produced in a full year's farming. Frozen Icelandic mutton is winning markets abroad. Its quality due to the unique free-ranging system practiced here since the first sheep were turned loose off the long ships that brought them. All year, the herds run wild. When roundup time comes, every able-bodied man and boy works at bringing down into the communal paddocks close on 1 million sheep. They will be equally shared out once the farmers and their sons have led away the older stock earmarked the previous year. In the same way, thousands of wild ponies are brought down each September. The best are wrestled into compounds so that the long process of breaking them and bridling them as riding animals can begin. Of the many thousands of ponies brought in at each roundup, most are turned loose again. For although they offer only a sporting interest, Icelanders are still sentimental about these tough little beasts on which the entire life of their country once depended. In the past, ponies featured as highly profitable exports to the coal mines of Britain and to the rest of Europe. But those days are over. The coming of steam and science allowed the Icelanders to turn back to the ocean, to harvest it, and to find in these waters wealth beyond the dreams of their seafaring forefathers. Over 1 million tons a year, an average of 5 tons for each inhabitant. But only 1 fish in 10 remains in the country. The rest, quick frozen or salted, pays for 9/10 of everything Iceland buys abroad, and does so from Nigeria to New York and from the Soviet Union to South America. While the men are at sea, handling the catch is work for their women and children, a tough, wet job no machine can do. In the nation's survival industry, the rewards are high. Champion gutters can better the Prime Minister's salary. But his fingers are too numb to pick up the pay tokens, 1 for each full barrel. They are dropped into the tops of sea boots. Sometimes the silver herring is the killer. On the edge of the Arctic, he demands a high price, paid in ships and in men. Because of the danger, Icelandic lifesavers are always ready to answer calls from the hundreds of trawlers of a dozen flags always cruising around the island. Most emergencies begin only as a case of appendicitis or an arm trapped in a winch. But time saved can also save life or limb. And today, when the rescue ship is within reach of shore, the final relay can be made by helicopter. Human survival in water as cold as this is counted in minutes. So in case of upsets, an inflatable rescue dinghy goes over the side, manned by lifesavers in protective scuba diving suits. Centuries separate the Viking longships that first prospected these waters and the Iceland Coast Guard helicopter that skirts them in minutes. Yet both were probing the unknown, applying skill and intelligence to secure the future of a nation. The helicopter mission today is to bring to Surtsey scientists of the National Research Council, part of a long-term project to study volcanic heat, pressure, and gases bursting from this still burning island. Technology is the new and urgent phase in the continuing 1,000-year war conducted here by generations of Icelanders to snatch and to share what began as a very thin national living. If mankind has one success story, it may be this Icelandic saga of a society just, prosperous, and equitable, yet rooted into a violent land, born by fire from the sea.